going to see one group exhibit, which is actually a PowerPoint because the exhibit board has been taken apart, one individual exhibit, and that's behind me. For the first time ever, we're actually bringing a whole exhibit board that is actually created, and then a documentary. All of these are kind of in the in-between stages because we like to make improvements between the regional contest and the state contest. So that's why you'll see things in different orders. So we're going to start with Miller, so go ahead, Ann.
I think one thing that's really neat about their project is about Cap Anson, a Marshalltown native. And I think maybe at regionals it might have hurt them a little bit because their judges didn't know who he was. But they sure learned a lot about him. No, they didn't. And like Susan said, they had an exhibit to start with, but then we took it apart and they transferred what they had on their exhibit to PowerPoint.
So our project, as you can see, is on Cap Anson and how he took a stand against baseball and the segregation of baseball.
Our thesis was in the late 1800s, Cap Anson, a professional baseball player, took a stand by refusing to play against African American players in baseball. His stand was against one player refusing to play individual games, became the catalyst for segregation of the entire baseball league.
His background is that Cap Anson was the first white child born in Marshalltown, Iowa on April 17, 1852, and that's a quote from Swisher in 1922. He was the first baseman for the Chicago White Stockings and then managed for several years after his playing. His name stood atop the record books in several categories for years.
These are a few photos of Cap Anson, and the middle one is his plaque, which is on Main Street.
Located where, young lady?
Main Street.
You can't be more specific.
It's not a store at now, but it used to be a dry cleaning service, I think. Yeah, dry cleaning.
Was it the yard place?
It wouldn't hurt for you to research that and let people know. That's later. Sorry.
Cap's acts of racism. One incident happened during an exhibition game against the Toledo Mudheads on August 10, 1883. A black catcher named Walker was to play against the Chicago team, but Anson refused to play against a black player. Another incident occurred in an exhibition game against the Newark Little Giants on July 14, 1887. Anson again refused to play baseball against Newark's black pitcher. The next day, team owners took a vote 6-4 against the gentleman's agreement to deny black players from the major leagues.
Anson was an innovator in the game of baseball. He was the first to use the hit-and-run play in which the runner on base would start and run, and the batter would be required to swing at whatever was pitched. He also initiated spring training, the practice of backing up other fielders, coaching from the baselines, the pitching rotation, and platooning players so that left-handed batters hit against right-handed pitchers and vice versa. He also stands as the first manager to win 1,000 games. Clark, 1992. These innovations remain today.
Additional information about Cap. He never let his players drink, and he made sure that all of them were in bed at a certain time. As historian Howard Rosenberger describes, Anson was both moral and immoral to this day, and Major League Baseball had no black players after 1891 until 1947 when Jackie Robinson began to play. Any questions?
Was it hard when you were learning about him? Because in some ways, just like you said, he did so many great things for baseball, and you wanted to like him, and then he goes into where he was not wanting to play with any of the black players. Did you find that kind of hard to how you felt about him?
Yeah, we tried to research both sides of the story so that people could pick their side. So we didn't really pick a side. We kind of just did everything.
In he was born in Marshalltown. Did he stay in Marshalltown, or did he move?
He moved
To Chicago.
Okay, so he was exposed to African Americans, certainly, right?
Yes.
But not growing up, or what was Marshalltown like? What were the demographics like in Marshalltown?
Growing up, he experienced playing baseball as a kid with black players. But when he got older, he thought that they should have 2 different leagues for the different kinds of colors of skin.
So he was exposed.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the thing that we noticed later, when you think about the time, the years that he was in this mode, that's the way the country was,
Yes.
the entire country. Blacks really were not non-existent, but they were not recognized as people.
Yes.
So that's pretty much, he was not the only person who felt that.
Yes.
So it was not unusual, even though we don't like it, and we hate to think that he was representing Marshalltown and be prejudiced, but unfortunately it was very common in that time.
It wasn't unusual for people to not like African Americans doing things that they were doing, but Cap Anson just spoke out about it and tried to stop it.
Exactly. He was quite vehement.
Do you think if Cap Anson would have been a mediocre ball player, his stand would have made a difference?
I don't think it would have made a big of a difference because he was such a well-known player, everybody wanted to follow him.
And how did you do your research? Was it mainly here, right here, or where did you find all your information?
We started off finding our information here, and we found that baseball bat, which is a replica of the bat Cap used.
We did an email interview with 2 different professors. We thought it was really interesting that they both had very different views on whether he was good or bad.
Good or bad as opposed to in his racial thinking or
Yeah.
his baseball thinking,
In his racial thinking.
and his racial stance.
Were they local?
No.
No.
Where were they from? The professor?
We don't know.
Oh.
I don't either. Was it one from Chicago, right? He's from, one was from Chicago, but we don't know where the other one was from. Any more questions?
Are
Thank
you
you.
interested in learning any more about him?
Yes, we thought it was very interesting how that even though he was good at baseball and he was very moral, that when he was playing with black players, he was very immoral. So yes, we'd like to learn more about him, or at least I would.
We have an exhibit up here,
Mhm.
and we have a couple books about him here. I think you would enjoy them because he was more than just a baseball player.
That's where we got some of our information.
Thank you.
Very good.
So did add a little.
But the subtitle's not fixed.
Yes. Okay, there's a subtitle that's not fixed. This is still a rough draft. There's one subtitle that's messed up, but I think you'll forgive them.
So our project is on Edna Griffin. She was a civil rights activist in the 1940s in Des Moines, which was ahead of her time since the civil rights movement was in the 60s. Well, we researched by first we chose our topic because we wanted to do something with a woman who took a stand, and so we found Edna Griffin and decided that it would be a good person to do our project on. And then explain how we did it.
First we kind of started local, looking around and online, and then we expanded it to a few libraries that were in colleges, and we went to what's the museum called?
The Historical Museum.
Yeah,
of
the
Des Moines.
Historical Museum in Des Moines. And we got a few interviews with her children as well as someone who was kind of influenced by her that is now...
She's a representative in the legislature in Des Moines, Ruth Ann Gaines.
Mhm.
And we went into there and interviewed her there, and we talked on the phone with both two of Edna Griffin's children.
You went to Iowa Women's Archives.
Yeah.
In
Looked
Iowa
at
City.
her FBI files.
Yes.
So
Very
more on that
nice.
to come. But we'll
Store in Des Moines, Iowa, along with John Tibbs and Leonard Hudson. She was refused service because of her race. Griffin was appalled by this discrimination and took a stand for civil with series of protests, sit-ins, and court cases to help end segregation in Des Moines, paving the way for future civil rights activists.
In 1920, Southern migration and war caused many blacks to come to Iowa for work, but the jobs were scarce and they were left with mainly domestic, service, and janitorial types of jobs. The 1884 Iowa Jim Crow law outlawed discrimination in places of public amusement. In 1892, restaurants and lunch counters were added to this law. If violated, there was said to be a $100 fine, but it was never enforced. During that time, the NAACP had been working toward ending prejudice in Des Moines. The NAACP held many rallies, including one in 1920, in an attempt to stop the assistant attendance officer for public schools from placing all 800 of the black students in Des Moines into a single 8-room school. This case ended with a letter from the officer reporting that segregation was not included in their policy. Other cases included blacks being prohibited from swimming in public pools.
Griffin said, "They are always feeling there was no discrimination, which seemed a little bit strange to me. I did find out that the NAACP undertook 1 or 2 occasions to bring into court violators of the law, but their problem was they had no witnesses, and so they gave up." Griffin also stated during an interview that she didn't come to Des Moines with the intent of becoming an activist, but when she arrived on January 2nd, 1947, she could see that there was a problem and she wanted to do something about it. Having grown up in Walpole, New Hampshire, she wasn't used to the segregation that was happening in other parts of the country. After finishing her high school career, she had gone to Fisk University from 1929 to 1933, where she majored in sociology and met her husband, Stanley Griffin. Edna and Stanley had decided to move to Des Moines so he could pursue his career as a doctor. She was the mother of 3 children. Her eldest, Phyllis, was an infant of 6 months at the beginning of the Katz case.
John Bibbs had stated, "Growing up, we were conditioned to go in certain doors, stand in certain places. If we wanted to get a sandwich at a downtown lunch counter, we knew to stand at the end of the counter and take our food out and sit on the curb and eat it." During the protests against Katz, Griffin had spoken with some students attending Drake University in an attempt to get the students to join her sit-ins, but found that they didn't think anything could be done. These barriers that blacks had to face is what caused Griffin to speak up. In order to encourage blacks to have the audacity to stand up against racial injustices, Edna organized sit-ins, pickets, and the distribution of handbills. When Edna came to Des Moines, there had already been 3 criminal prosecution cases and 14 civil cases against Katz, but all ultimately failed. Griffin had tried going into the store to be served many times, but was told that the store was too full, so she could not be served. When Phyllis was asked if her mother purposefully walked into Katz the day she was refused, she stated,
"For sure. No, there was a bit of a test there. Absolutely there was a bit of a test."
It was said that Katz would refuse to let blacks sit at the counter, but would take their money on the retail side. When she entered the store on the day she was refused with Leonard Hudson, John Bibbs, and her daughter Phyllis, the waitress attempted to serve them, but was told by Maurice Katz that the Katz store did not serve colored people. When Griffin questioned the waitress about this, she disclosed that they did not have the right equipment to serve colored people.
Got another friend who kicked it, sit at the counter, and to fix it out front. And probably news coverage, so she got people in the community started getting aware of what was going on.
Griffin had stood in front of Katz, distributed handbills to those walking by, and got volunteers to picket outside of the store for an entire year. 3 days after she was refused service, Griffin filed charges against Katz and would become the key witness in the ensuing court case. The waitress, who had been fired from Katz drugstore for attempting to serve them, had testified in court as Mrs. Griffin's witness. Whites had volunteered their names and addresses if they were needed as witnesses. Edna was represented by her lawyer, Charles Howard, who was the leading member of the NAACP in Iowa. On October 6, 1948, the trial was held against Katz, who pled not guilty. It was concluded by the all-white jury that he was guilty of discrimination and was charged a $50 fine. Shortly after, Katz filed for an arrest of judgment and a new trial, which was denied 3 weeks later. Griffin had taken it into her own hands to file a damage suit trial in the Polk County District Court for $10,000. 5 days after filing the suit, the trial was held and she was awarded $1. Katz's defensive lawyer, Paul Stinson, stated, "I honor her, Edna, as a female Moses leading her people out of the wilderness, a modern-day Joan of Arc, though she is misguided and her methods are wrong." Charles Howard and Henry McKnight were attorneys for John Bibbs, Arthur Bryant, Barbara Williams, Gordon Jasper, Leonard Hudson, as well as Kenneth Walker, who was a white man. These attorneys fought against Katz Corporation to the end, causing the corporation to abandon its Jim Crow policies. A monetary settlement in the amount of $1,000 was shared equally by the plaintiffs on December 2, 1949. Griffin gained attention with her case due to her methods and her plucky character. Edna Griffin's reason for taking a stand is stated by her daughter, Phyllis Griffin.
She wanted access to quality housing, quality education, and the ability to travel throughout the state without discrimination. And she has all of her life for that.
People thought that blacks being treated differently was normal, so they did not speak out against it. Edna Griffin knew that this wasn't right and said that she didn't know who she was more mad at, cats or the people doing nothing about it. The reason Edna had been effective while others weren't is stated by her son, Stanley.
Dad was a very quiet, very supportive of what my mother did, and the only reason my mother could do what she was doing because he was self-employed. Blacks who were involved with the picketing, so were worried about getting fired. He supported everything mother did, and he supported us financially.
Though it had seemed to be a fight against whites and blacks, there were also those in the white community who didn't follow suit. As we had stated previously, many whites had testified in the court case and picketed alongside Griffin. But while many supported her efforts, there were those who disagreed with her actions. Clearly, many whites did not approve of her protests, but there were also some blacks that believed the outcome of her actions would end badly and result in worse conditions for them. The case against Murray's Cats had caused Cat's Drugstore in Des Moines to end segregation, as well as other businesses across Iowa. Although Griffin's actions had only caused desegregation in Iowa, her actions in the 1940s were influential in spawning similar movements across the country. Clara Luper, in 1958, had began her own set of sit-ins at a Cat's store in Oklahoma City. This caused Cats to change their integration policies at all of the chain's many stores. Sit-ins such as one caused by the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which stated that all Americans had the right to vote, is one example of Edna's impact. Another example would be the Greensboro sit-in of 1960, which was a protest at a local lunch counter organized by several college students. This sit-in sparked many colleges to stand up against segregation.
The long-term impact is that you are talking to Ruth Ann Gaines in the Iowa legislature. That's the long-term impact. I was the dream of Edna Griffin. Someone like me someday could do things like this, not only in the state of Iowa, but in the United States of America.
Although Edna and many other effective activists helped in desegregating the United States, examples of racial discrimination still exist, such as in the Cracker Barrel in 2004 and Denny's in 1994. Restaurant cases that reported blacks were forced to wait to be served and had to pay up front, while whites pay after their meal. One incident involved 6 black Secret Service agents that had waited an hour to be served, while a group of whites had been served immediately.
I know that there is some discrimination. In my lifetime, I have seen positive change, but it is still there, and I'm kind of amazed that there is as much there as there is.
Edna Griffin successfully took a stand against Cat's Drugstore's racial discrimination, but her efforts for civil rights did not end in the 1940s. Later in her life, she was involved in many other protest movements, such as helping unionize Midwest Bay and Burlap Company and leading Iowans to the March on Washington, helping to organize the event. Edna took a stand by helping end segregation and paving the way for future activists with her leadership. John Bibbs once stated, "We all knew we had a problem, but it was Mrs. Griffin who did something about it. We owe her. Let's not forget that."
Did you interview or talk to people here in Marshalltown to see if there was a similar attitude that was true of Des Moines at that time? In other words, was Marshalltown a lot like Des Moines or the rest of Iowa?
We didn't really do that with our research. That is something that we could add to it, but we focused more on what happened in Des Moines.
How did you find her children? To get the interviews?
What was his name?
What was it?
John Tinker.
Oh yeah, John Tinker, yep.
He was like friends with them, and he's like a judge, isn't he?
I think so.
And so we found his contact information, and he gave us their emails, and then we set up a time for a phone interview.
Yeah, that was a challenge.
Yeah,
it was.
And they also gave you photos too.
Yes.
I'm wondering, sorry, I should raise my hand, if
want, or I'm guessing that they would love to see your finished copy.
Mm-hmm.
Will you be sending them?
Everybody that we talked to, like there were people we interviewed that weren't included because it wasn't like a video interview, but they all said that they wanted us to send them a copy of the video.
I hope you follow through, because I'm sure that they would be honored to see that.
And you didn't even mention the FBI stuff because it doesn't really fit this story, but tell them about what you read in those FBI files. It was so funny.
She was involved in the Communist Party during her.
In the 60s, right?
Yeah. And we also read on how the FBI would actually like hide in her closet in her house and like listen to things that she was saying.
To her husband.
Yeah. So they were like in her house and just hiding there.
Because of her involvement with the Communist Party.
Was she truly involved with the Communist Party, or is that just what they said?
We've heard many different sides of that, but she was.
That was a part of her being an activist and with the NAACP and things like that.
So she was, standing up for workers' rights, I think, is what she was doing.
So she wasn't actually a communist per se, she was just
involved with the party.
Yeah, she was just involved with it.
So before, when I've had students do research when they get FBI papers, a lot of it's redacted, like blacked out. Was hers still blacked out, or was it?
Yeah, it actually made it a little hard to read some things because you had no clue what it was
like
saying.
Names were blacked out and stuff.
That's neat, though. It's
There was a lot on her.
And then tell them what you're doing to improve it.
We realized that our photos didn't really match what we were talking about, and so we have to fix that and little like edit parts, and we edited the script a little bit.
And obviously the subtitle, that needs to be fixed too.
Her exhibit is here. I assume you won't be able to read everything on it, but after she talks about it, please take the time to look at it and give it a closer look.
Yes, okay. I'm a junior at MHS. I started National History in 7th grade, so I've been doing it every year since. This is my second time doing an independent exhibit. Previous, I've done 2 group exhibits with one partner and a paper. So I don't have a PowerPoint because this is my first year I've actually gotten to bring my exhibit, which you can look at later. And following the theme of the other 2 presentations, mine is about discrimination, but in a different part of the country. So I did my project over the Coromontu case, which was a Supreme Court case, and it had to do with the Order 966 and the internment of Japanese Americans, which I found, especially right now, it's important to remind ourselves just of their story, and that I learned a lot in school about the Holocaust, but I don't really learn about how we interned our own Americans and our own people. So to start off, I'll talk a little bit about what started the internment camps. So an anti-Japanese sentiment was pretty obvious in California, and I mean, it didn't quite reach here because there wasn't as many Japanese Americans, but because Japan was closer to California, a lot of them moved to get work and work on the railroads. And so many people tried to kind of openly discriminated. I have a picture here, and like there's many at Congress on their picture collection of like all these houses that had giant banners that said like "get out" and stuff like that. So it was pretty blatant that they were not being accepted. And so that kind of started, and it was just that whole feeling. And then Pearl Harbor had happened, and so we're in World War II, and then we're worried about spies, and espionage became like a huge deal, and it was this worry that they could be a part of spying on us. And so the safest thing was decided that General DeWitt was the general who pushed for it, and he's like, this just isn't safe. We need to put them in internment camps. Like, we need to protect our country and whatnot. So he, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Executive Order 966, he ordered it, and that began the internment camps. And so I'll go a little bit talking about Fred's story. His family got order little bit later, because it was different sets of orders that they hung up, and as they went across the whole state of California, and a little bit in like Nevada, New Mexico, and Arizona, but mostly in California, like the whole state. Because what happened was, instead of saying, okay, in these central areas, it turned into like the entire state of California was in danger, and so they interned the entire state of California. And so, so his family got ordered, and he decided to stay behind. So even though he got ordered to go to internment camp, he kind of laid low, and he got a license, but his license, it was a fake license and a fake ID, and it was a Spanish ID, and so, and it had like a picture of a Spaniard, but he also got some eye surgery, so his eyes would be a little bit more open, and it got like a cut right here, which you really can't even notice in his later pictures, and it wasn't a major surgery, but just like a little bit, so he couldn't be recognized as easily, and so he actually was able to go almost 2 years without being caught, and then he was waiting for his girlfriend at a train station, and he was just walking by, and 2 officers came over, and they're like, hey, have you seen any Japanese Americans around, or people of Japanese descent? And he's like, oh no, and they're like, okay, well, can we see your ID? And the problem was, is he didn't speak Spanish, so when they saw his ID, and he got taken in. And so, at the internment camp, he immediately knew like this was really wrong, and so he actually, what happened is he actually didn't get put in internment camp because he was evading the police. He got put in a jail, and he got put in prison, and so that's how he was able to appeal to the courts and appeal, because he had to go through the whole court system, and that was like what made him unique from why not like other people in internment camps weren't necessarily appealing to the courts. And so there's at least a couple other 3 cases that were appealing federally and that were right up there next to him in the Supreme Court, but his case got, as it moved up, got to be that big spot in the Supreme Court. And as we found out, they decided against him in his case. So his case was built on the fact that it was pretty obvious, as we can look at, there's, okay, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 amendments that he was able to cite that they were blatantly going against, but the problem was that their argument was it was a wartime necessity. And because it's a wartime necessity, that pretty much is like an overrule for everything. And so that's kind of what hits you, and that's the part where it's like we need to always remind ourselves of this problem, because it's like an end all is, okay, well, we're in war, so we can do absolutely anything. And so his case got overruled. There was 3 dissents, which I have here, and they all pretty much say the same thing, like, this isn't right. I know it's not right, but, and I see that it's a wartime necessity, but it's pretty obvious that it goes against our Constitution. And so, after the dissents, it actually ended, the war ended a little bit, I think, well, let's see, like 4 or 5 months or so, it kind of ended, so he went back to prison for a little bit, and then he was able to get released because the war ended, and it's no longer a wartime necessity, so they're kind of able to appeal. It wasn't until about 30 years later that a lawyer in California brought back up the case, and so it got reversed. The case got reversed, so he actually, won. But that was at least 30 years later, and he didn't even bring it up himself. So I think another big part of going into the conclusion of what followed after is after he got out of prison, he got married and settled down. He had a daughter who I contacted, but hasn't got back to me. She did send me an email recently saying that she got my email, and the problem is there's actually a Fred Korematsu Day, and she has been working on some celebration stuff, finishing up some stuff with that, and that's actually in January, but she said they had another, they've been going around to some colleges and talking about it. But, so, he got a day, and then going back to a little bit of what was happening in the country for Japanese Americans it wasn't until almost a century later that Ronald Reagan came in and he signed a bill that it gave some money to the Japanese Americans interned. It was an official apology, and so they finally got their apologies for being interned. looking back as a historian and as research, we can look at the fact that there was actually, as you can imagine, there was only 2 people that were cited for espionage. They were not Japanese Americans, so that means 0 Japanese Americans were cited for espionage. So we interned almost a million people, thousands of people, and 0 ended up being. And so the feeling at the Japanese internment camps was, and from like different biographies and autobiographies that they wrote about their time at the camp, it was, we want to do our part for our country. If this is necessary, then we will do our part, and we will be kind, and we will be patient, and we will do whatever it takes, because this is what they've told us is good for our country. And we are Americans, so we will be kind, and we will be happy, and we will do our time, and we will live our lives. And so, kind of as an ode to that, I have people laughing behind the barbed wire in different pictures, because they wanted to do their part as Americans. There really wasn't, except for Fred Korematsu, he was kind of the rebel who tried to hide away. Most of the feeling of Japanese Americans was, we were going to go to camps without a fight, and there really wasn't any fights against it. It was, this is what we're going to do. We're Americans. There's no problem here. We can prove it. And so we have the soldier marching by in the barbed wire, but behind me I have pictures of Japanese Americans that just are smiling, and they're living their lives. I think that kind of brings to a conclusion my story here. I think I'll read my thesis. And so, at the opposition of the United States government, Fred Korematsu stood up for Japanese American rights during World War II. Deemed as a wartime necessity, the Supreme Court held that the blatant infringement of Japanese American rights did not exceed the wartime possibility of espionage. Fred Korematsu recognized the compulsory exclusion of Japanese Americans and as suspect to the Constitution, and spoke up on behalf of thousands of interned American citizens. And what made this topic so easy to fit to the theme was his big quote that they pushed, and that he actually got Google Doodle this year, so his picture was on Google on his Fred Korematsu Day, and it had, if you clicked on it, it had his main quote that pops up under his picture biography is, if you have a feeling that something is wrong, don't be afraid to speak up. And so that goes really hand in hand with standing up for your rights and standing up for what's wrong. So, thank you. Any questions?
Did you enter into any conversation about comparing what happened during World War I with the German people, often here in the Midwest, who were quite recent as immigrants from Germany, and what happened to the Japanese in World War II? I know there were German Lutheran pastors who were put in prison because they used German language in their worship services in the Midwest. Not often, but there were examples of that. And it's true, is it not, that we, in times of threat, we will set aside human rights because we're afraid of a certain group or a race, or afraid of people. Even today we have the war on terrorism, and we then set up barriers against immigrants who we think might carry terroristic ideas into our country. Is it not similar?
Yes, and I think that's really what brought me to this topic, because I felt it was kind of my chance to make sure and just kind of like share the story, and it's a reminder, like, we do learn about it, but I think every single year in high school I've learned about the Holocaust, which is so important, but I wish we'd also talk about the fact that we did this in our own country too. Maybe, definitely not to the extent, but it's important to realize that we as Americans are still suspect to doing these kinds of things.
We aren't perfect either.
No.